Thank you, Mihaela, and thank you very much for putting this program together. And also want to thank Dr. Taw because a lot of what he has said actually sets the stage for my presentation, where I will focus a lot on stress and the relationship between stress and illness. Okay. So I will add to the last talk and give you some information about how stress can lead to what I refer to autonomic dysregulation and disease. Learn the role of emotions and our thinking patterns in creating and furthering this imbalance and interfering with healing and recovery. And I'm reminded of the patient who goes to the doctor because he has problems, and the doctor says, well, you have to get to bed early, you have to stop drinking alcohol, you have to change your diet, you have to stop smoking, and the patient walks out of the room saying, I have to change my doctor. And so I don't want to make this talk seem like it's this big burden of all the different things you have to do. I want to give you a framework so that you could see how the things that you can add to in your life can actually help you in this process. And I'll present a 9-component model for restoring optimal self-regulation and resilience, and give you some specific tools that will help you in this process. Really, the basic message I want to give you is that your body does have a natural ability to heal. It has this ability when we're able to keep the body in its most optimal state of balance. And there are many steps that you can all take in this process of achieving this optimal balance. So that's the good news. Now, if we begin with stress and your stress response, one of the first things that's important to realize is that your stress response is a survival mechanism, it's an adaptive mechanism, and to a great extent, it helps all of us. It mobilizes us for action, it sharpens our senses, it allows us to take more information in about what's going on, and within limits, it actually improves cognitive functioning. So that's the good news, but it also indicates one of our resistances to dealing with stress. You can see that if it has these positive qualities, that there's going to be some unconscious reluctance to actually address stress. So, it helps us with legitimate threats and danger, and it helps engage our fight or flight response. That's our body's response to danger. Now, you saw Dr. Taw give a similar kind of diagram before about the effects of stress on the body. I'm not going to go into all of these little fine prints other than to point out that there are actually 1,400 changes that take place in your body every time you engage the stress response. And somewhere up there is inflammation, among other things. Now, certain systems in your body become activated with stress: your sympathetic nervous system, your neuromuscular system, and your cardiovascular system. But at the same time, there are certain systems in your body that tend to be inhibited when we engage in the fight or flight, the stress response. And it's interesting to put the immune system at the top because there's the immune system on the one hand is involved when there's stress. However, if you think about the evolutionary design of our stress mechanism, so if you're mobilizing and trying to run to avoid being lunched for a tiger, you're not thinking about your own dinner. So you tend to shut down your digestive system. You tend to shut down any system that isn't necessary for immediate handling of the danger. So, there's activation of certain systems in our body, and what we can say is when we engage in the stress response, we're engaging in a protective function of the body. And as Dr. Tall mentioned, this is a constriction. Think about protecting. You want to you're guarding against. Well, all the energy of the body is going into that, and look what is missing. The bottom part of that, of the slide, growth, healing, development, and maintenance. In other words, the body either engages in protection or it engages in all these other types of activities, which if you think about illness, if you think about restoring balance, you want to make sure that you're activating, notice the parasympathetic nervous system. So there are two branches to the nervous system. Sympathetic activates with stress, and parasympathetic is the part of the nervous system that we want to engage to restore balance to the body. We want these two systems to be in balance. And Dr. Tor gave a nice slide previously of what happens when this is not in balance. Now, all of us are challenged because of the imbalance between the stimuli in our lives, in our daily activities that trigger stress, that trigger danger, that trigger uncertainty, versus the stimuli in our environment that trigger the opposite, rest, recuperation. How many of you have stimuli in your lives that are regularly triggering rest, safety? Very few, right? Okay, so, and this is true for all of us. This is true for our modern society in that we are constantly encountering uncertainty, danger, but yet we rarely are encountering environments, situations that tell us, okay, you can calm down, you can relax. And so there's this automatic, natural tendency to go into this state of imbalance. Now, we have what I refer to as an evolutionary mismatch, because we're geared to deal with stress by triggering our fight or flight response. But think about the stresses that you encounter. How many of them actually require either fighting the stresses or running from them? Right? Very few, right? So our bodies mobilize for fight or flight, but then there's no release. Because if you're in conflict with, well, maybe if you're in conflict, you start yelling and that gets it out. But if you're dealing with a time pressure, if you're in your car and you're late for an appointment and your body's mobilizing, there's no release for that activation. So our stress response of 50,000 years ago, the hunter-gatherers, it was very clear what was a stress, what was a danger, what was life-threatening. But what about us now? We have bills. Is my friend angry with me? Will I be liked? Am I being judged? Am I too heavy? Will I get my hair done in time for the movie? So all of these are the kinds of stresses that we encounter throughout the day. And the common denominator of today's stresses, most of them do not require the fight or flight response, so there's that added buildup. Now, on top of what I've said to this point, psychological factors exacerbate this imbalance. The need to be liked makes us engage in behavior that we otherwise might not do, or it makes us worry about whether we are going to be liked. The need to be perfect, so that we're continually pushing ourselves. All these are sources of stress. Our difficulty saying no, so we engage in more activities than we actually have the time or the ability for. And fear of rejection further enhances this imbalance that I'm talking about. So, a lot of times we think that, oh, we have an event, a situation, and it caused me to be stressed. So I would say that if we look at that diagram, most of the time we're saying we have the event A and we have our stress response C. And we blame it on, our boss, we blame it on our spouse, we blame it on things going on in our lives. But here's actually the good news. If that were the case, if we were so vulnerable to everything going on in our day, in our lives, we would be in bad shape because we would not really be in control of our stress. The good news is that we can put a B in between the A, the event, and the C is our stress response. And B is our interpretation. B is our thinking. B is the way we evaluate a situation and determine whether it's a danger or not. So the more we anticipate situations as being dangers, the more we're triggering the stress response. How many of you would categorize yourself as catastrophic thinkers? As soon as something is going to happen in the future, you go to the worst possible outcome. What can go wrong? What's the problem? You're triggering your stress response. Now, on top of that, let's say you have something stressful happening tomorrow. But right here and now, as you sit in this nice, peaceful environment, you start thinking about that stress. You are going to be, right now, triggering that stress response. And so something that may be an hour's worth of stress can extend to 24 hours if you're starting to be concerned about it right now. And then you go to sleep tonight and you're still worrying about it and you can't get to sleep. So you're further exacerbating the problem. Now, you engage in that stressful behavior or that encounter. Maybe it's a meeting with somebody. Maybe it's an appointment that's stressful. You finish the meeting, you're walking out and you're starting to think, did I say the right thing? Maybe they're thinking I'm not smart enough. What's going to happen? And now you extend that stress response after the event. So all of these are ways that we expand the imbalance between the sympathetic activation of our nervous system and the parasympathetic. Okay. So if you think about yourself in a critical way, you're going to further intensify this process. If you think that others are going to be judging you, you're doing the same. If you think that the world is a dangerous place, all of these things contribute to this growing imbalance. And the bottom line is it all contributes to self-regulation impairment. The body's ability to stay in this place of balance, and that's where breakdown begins to occur. Dr. Toh mentioned Hans Selye, who actually was the person who took the word stress from physics and brought it into the human realm by referring to stress. And he said, aging is simply the sum total of all the stresses we place on our bodies. So we get into trouble by turning on our stress response too frequently, too intensely, for too long a duration. So, most illnesses, including headaches, chronic stomach aches, irritable bowel, insomnia, etc., are caused by this autonomic dysregulation, either caused by or intensified by this imbalance. Now, it's interesting, our brain has two really primary functions that I want to emphasize right now. And it's only been recently, in the last 15 years or so, that we actually have changed a very basic premise about how the brain operates. Up until about 15 years ago, we believed we were born with a full complement of nerve cells, and that as we age, we simply lose them. And in the last 15 or 20 years, we've learned that actually the opposite is the case, that our brain is capable of producing new nerve cells throughout our lifespan. That's great, isn't it? And so that is at the heart of what we call neuroplasticity, and the ability of the brain to create new nerve cells. And if we think in terms of making changes, we have the raw materials now for that to occur. Countering that notion of neuroplasticity, however, is our fixed patterns, our rigid patterns that we develop as a child. So we learn about how the world works as a child, and that actually determines how our brain forms. And what happens, therefore, is that when we approach things in our lives as an adult, if we had a childhood that in different ways was dangerous, our brain is geared to expect danger in the present, even if danger is not present. So our brains are developed and they form more or less rigid patterns based on our childhood learning. And this is one of the things that we have to address in terms of resilience. Here's just, I wanted to show you, this is we're looking here at somebody's brain waves, their electroencephalogram, and we can see that their brain waves, let me stop this for a moment, brain waves of different frequencies, very fast and very slow waves, and we can separate them out here from the slowest brain waves all the way up to the fastest. One thing that we notice is that when the body and the brain get out of balance, it produces too much of these very slow waves right here, called delta and theta, and also a lot of higher beta waves, faster waves here. And what that does is overactivates the brain with the higher, faster brain waves, but also what we found is that these accentuated lower frequency brain waves correlate with chronic pain. So we see changes in the brain based on this imbalance that I'm talking about. So now let's kind of shift gears and talk about what we can do about this imbalance. And the good news is there is a lot that can be done. I'm reminded of a client who came to see me because of stress-related symptoms, and as I typically do as I'm taking a history, I'll begin by seeing how they spend their time, because a lot of executives that I work with are just working 15 hours a day, and that's the source of a lot of their stress. And so he told me, well, on the weekends I go to the club and I play tennis, and I thought, oh, very good, he's taking time for himself. Well, what about during the week? How hard are you working during the week? And he said, well, on Tuesdays and Thursdays I play golf, and then Mondays I go out on my yacht. And I thought, why was this person referred to me? I'm a little stymied, and I asked him what's his source of stress. And he says, well, trying to do that on $200 a week. So we can create our own stress. And in your handouts, you had a 40-item questionnaire that I've created based on my model of resilience, which I'm presenting right here, so that you can actually score yourself and plot your scores on the accompanying profile and see where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. And these are the 9 components in 3 different areas. The first is relationship, and there's relationship with yourself, relationship with others, and relationship with something greater. Organismic balance and mastery is physical, mental, or cognitive, and emotional. I'm going to go into each of these. And then how you engage with the world is your presence, flexibility, and the last is power, which I define as the ability to get things done. So, here's where we begin to ask some important questions. How do you treat yourself? Are you accepting or judgmental? Supportive or critical? Are you lax, firm, or too firm? Are you able to take in compliments? And do you own your successes and your gifts? We are continually talking to ourselves, that voice in our heads that I refer to as your internal voice or your internal parent. And the question is, how do you talk to yourself? Because how you talk to yourself, and usually what feels right, is not what really is right, but it's what you learned felt right growing up. Again, the way our childhood lessons get locked into our brain. What I like to tell people is that this is not in your DNA. The way you talk to yourself, that voice, that internal parent, is learned. And just as it's learned, it can be unlearned. So the goal, in terms of this first component, is developing a healthy internal parent or internal voice. And check this out, everybody. This is how you need to be talking to yourself. You're coming from a place of love. Most important, coming from a place of acceptance, with compassion, with support, where you value yourself, where you appreciate yourself, and you engage in self-care. So, as you start to think about how you actually talk to yourself, and maybe are particularly critical and hard on yourself, you don't forgive yourself for mistakes, things like this, you can set this up as your model, because this is the internal voice that you want to be developing. Because, and you can probably tell, if you have that healthy internal voice, you're going to be less likely to generate stress, right? Okay. So you want to nurture this healthy internal voice based on those principles I just gave you. It's never okay to put yourself down. It should be the 11th commandment. Be assertive with your healthy internal voice. One of the things I do when I work with people is I actually engage them in a dialogue between their existing internal voice and the healthy one, so that they can rehearse how to deal with that voice that tells them, you should have done this, you shouldn't have done that, why did you do this, and why didn't you do that? Okay? You want to own and accept your successes, and you want to make sure you take in the positive feedback of others. Most of the people I work with have great difficulty taking in compliments. Well, that's how we begin to develop confidence in ourselves, trust in ourselves, by taking in those positive messages from others. You want to practice self-soothing techniques, and we can do one right now. Take a moment and just take your hand and put it over your heart. And imagine that this hand is the hand of that healthy internal parent. Visualize a healthy internal parent sort of telling you it's okay. and let yourself feel that. Maybe massage your heart a little bit. And it's a way of touching into yourself. Gottman is a professor at the University of Washington, and he does a lot of work with couples. And he actually has a little apartment on the university campus, and couples go there and they are videotaped 24 hours a day, and he comes up with important lessons. And one of the important lessons he's come up with is that healthy relationships have, on average, a ratio of 20-to-1 positive to negative interactions. 20-to-1. Those relationships where that ratio drops below 5-to-1 are in danger. So what I want you to ask yourselves, what is my Gottman ratio with myself? It should be 20-to-1. Okay, and if it's not, that's your goal. Next is your relationship with others. We know how our brain operates when we're in contact with another person. We have cells in our brain called mirror neurons. So what happens in somebody else, we pick up on an unconscious level. In fact, if I'm close to you here in the audience, I can, if I monitor my electroencephalogram, I can actually pick up your heart rate in my EEG. That's what happens between people. So you want to, number one, establish intimate and vulnerable relationships where you can let your guard down, but you also want to be able to establish boundaries and appropriately say no when you need to. Most importantly, you want to make sure you're engaging with healthy people and minimizing relationships with people who have toxic energy, because you're going to pick up some of that energy. So, as I just said, you want to limit, or sometimes you can't eliminate, but at least limit contact with critical or negative people. You want to make sure that the people you're engaged with follow this Gottman ratio. You want to seek out positive and supportive people. And in your interactions with other people, you don't want to make assumptions. So, for example, one person can walk down the street and someone they know can be walking in the opposite direction. Just as they're about to say, hi, how you doing? That person has this sort of glum look on their face and just keeps walking. And that person may say, oh my goodness, is that person angry at me? What did I do wrong? And start reviewing frantically the last contact that they had to see if they maybe said something that's caused that person to be angry. And that person is getting stressed. Another person, same situation, might walk by and say, oh, Joe must have gotten up on the wrong side of the bed. Or maybe he has a toothache. Never making the assumption that that frown has to do with him. Don't make unnecessary assumptions. And finally, don't carry around unfinished business. If you have some issue with a friend, address it. Because when you don't, it causes some of the same tension that we're talking about. There are 3 areas of your relationship with something greater: having a meaning or purpose and direction in your life, having a spiritual aspect to your life, and giving service. These are 3 ways that you expand your horizon in your life, so hassles that take place today are not as impactful to you because you have this broader horizon, you have a purpose that you can rely on. So, to strengthen this component of resilience, you want to develop and strengthen some supportive spiritual belief. You want to identify what you care about in this world and develop some purpose and meaning for yourself in your life, and then find opportunities to give service. Physical balance and mastery is the one component of my resilience model that has the most to do with this notion of imbalance. So we can think about two sides of the equation, okay? On one side of the equation is what you can do to activate that parasympathetic response, the relaxation, the recuperation response, okay? And that's here, and we're going to go into that in a moment. On the other side of the equation are all the things that trigger the stress response, and so there you want to find ways of reducing situations that trigger the stress response. Within physical balance and mastery is that the restoring balance. There's nothing, there's no magic here. There are four goals: the ability to deeply relax, the ability to rapidly return to baseline after a stressful event, the ability to avoid overreaction in situations, and carving out safe times in your day and safe spaces where you can say, it's okay to let down my guard. There's no shortcut, there's no substitute to practicing a relaxation response, a relaxation exercise. If you want to build a muscle, you have to lift weights or do other kinds of exercises. Otherwise, thinking about it is not going to make it happen. Okay? The same thing is true with all of what we've been talking about with the imbalance. If you want to restore imbalance, you have to practice, retrain your body to be able to relax. Now, in addition, our muscles have memory. So you can engage in a relaxation exercise, but 5 minutes later, your muscles are going to go back to that tense place that they were before you practiced the relaxation exercise, because the muscles have memory, and they're going to go to where they're familiar. So, in addition to practicing a form of exercise, you want to remind yourself throughout the day, use a cue to check in with your body. Notice how your shoulders are elevated. Check in with your body right now. Notice where you're holding tension. Notice how you're breathing. Okay? Because part of the relaxation process is to engage in a really healthy breathing process. Healthy breathing for relaxation is breathing at approximately 6 breaths per minute, 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out. Okay? When we're stressed, we tend to breathe more shallow, we tend to breathe more rapid. Now, at the end of your day, say to yourself, remind yourself, my work day is over, I can now let go, I can now relax. You begin to set boundaries for yourself. You want to carve out safe times in your day where you can let down and let go. And you could do that at the end of the workday, and then you do it a second time before you go to bed, where you remind yourself that this is my safe time, this is my safe place, nothing can happen until 8 or 9 in the morning. I'm going to totally let go. And you, in a sense, literally program yourself to go to sleep knowing that you can totally let go. Because a lot of us don't do this and go to sleep still with a certain level of alertness. A couple of techniques that I use are biofeedback and neurofeedback. And this is, I'm just going to show you a quick display of this. With neurofeedback, we actually monitor your brain waves, and we can separate the different components. Here is the slow waves that I was talking about, and here the goal is to keep the slow waves below I'll stop this for a second. So there are three components that we're looking at, and we're literally giving the brain information so it can learn to shift out of its habitual pattern into a more healthy pattern. This is results of a study I did that was published a few years ago, in which we demonstrated using neurofeedback improved. Here we're looking at cognitive performance and improving attention and reducing impulsivity. So we use this a lot with attention deficit disorder. But also, this is a personality inventory, and we demonstrated here that we actually reduced depression and other areas of personality variables through the use of the neurofeedback. So the next component is our thinking. And the goal in your thinking is to have positive expectancy versus what I termed before catastrophic. You want to have a positive focus, and you want to have the ability to let go of negative thoughts so that you can be more present in your life. And we get into these habits of worry. And the interesting thing about worry is if you worry and then things turn out okay, the message that your brain is getting is that the worry resulted in things turning out okay. Not true. Not true, but our brain makes that association and reinforces the worry. So we have to break that habit, break that pattern. So some of the tools, you want to plan for potential problems in your life, but you want to expect the positive. You want to let go once you make that planning. You want to frame situations as challenges instead of problems. You want to use imagery, and here's a technique I like to use. We're all familiar with remote controls. Imagine that you have a remote control that is directly connected to the volume of your thinking in your brain, so that when you're worrying or thinking about something, try pressing the down volume and imagine that you're turning down that voice in your head until you can't hear it anymore. If you practice that, it will begin to work. And another way is, if something's going on in your life that you're having a problem with, imagine that somebody that you love is experiencing that same thing. And what would you say to that person? For example, if you've made a mistake and you're beating yourself up about it, if that mistake was done by somebody that you love, how would you talk to them about that mistake? And that'll give you a good idea about how to then talk to yourself. So, to summarize our emotional issues, we carry around what I refer to as unfinished business. Feelings that we haven't fully dealt with. It could be from something that happened yesterday, and it could be something that happened 10 years ago. And a lot of our anxiety is the result of some of these unfinished business feelings starting to bubble up. And in fact, one of the difficulties that some of you may have in practicing relaxation is that as you let go of your stress, try and relax and calm down, some of this unfinished business may start to bubble to the surface. You'll experience it as anxiety and try to get away from that relaxed condition. And so the solution is whatever's there that is going to come up, it's good that it comes up. It's an opportunity. And if you frame it as an opportunity to look at what's there that needs to be dealt with, your unfinished business, then you begin to address some of the emotional issues that are getting in your way and causing us to be overly reactive in situations. Because if I'm carrying around feelings, fears, anxiety, anger, and something happens in the present that somehow relates to that, it's going to trigger a much bigger reaction. And in fact, that's one of the ways for you to determine whether you have unfinished business, is if your reaction to a situation is out of proportion to that situation. Here's an example of heart rate patterns, and the bottom one is when this person is focusing on appreciation. You can see what we call coherent heart rate pattern. It increases as you breathe in and it decreases as you breathe out, and it's a nice smooth pattern. Notice when this person is frustrated, the same person, look what happens. Okay. That's a disruptive pattern. That's a more harmful pattern. It's a more out of balance pattern. So, the kinds of emotions that you carry with you determine your physiology to some extent. So, accept your feelings. They are not right or wrong. If they're there, they need to be addressed. Reframe emerging feelings as an opportunity to deal with them. And finally, resolve unfinished business. And this is a step-by-step process. First, you want to acknowledge. You want to think about what it's related to. You want to let yourself feel the feelings. Find some way of expressing them. So a lot of times we get stuck because we're feeling angry at somebody. It could be somebody who's no longer in our lives. How do we finish that? Well, the good news is what needs to be finished is not that that other person apologizes or even hears you. What needs to be finished is the release of the energy of those feelings. And what a lot of times people come to me and say, well, I've dealt with this anger for years and years toward my mother or father. But the key is acceptance. So if you're expressing your anger, but you still want that person to be different, you still want that person to hear you, or you want your childhood to have been different, that anger is going to just keep recirculating. So the key is acceptance. Not that I like it, but it's acceptance of reality. This is who that person is. This is what happened. And then finally, letting go. Just a couple more minutes. So I'll quickly go through the last three. Presence is the ability to be in the moment, because that's where change occurs. That's where real life, real excitement occurs. Most of the time, or a lot of the times, we're in our heads either about past events or future worries. So a nice simple exercise to bring yourself immediately into the present is what I call the 5 senses exercise. So right now, notice what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, tasting, touching. That brings you right here into the present moment. You can't be in tune with your senses unless you're here in the present moment. I encourage people, when you are about to engage somebody in the world, to look at your posture and stand up straight or sit up straight. Remember to breathe, smile, and then make sure you make contact with the person. Flexibility. This is the ability to adapt to current circumstances. So, the Princess and the Pea had difficulty adapting, and the goal is to be able to find the silver lining. The goal is, if something changes in your environment, to find some way of adjusting and adapting to be okay with how things are. And some of the tools would be to seek out new and different enriching experience, nurture your curiosity, do routine behaviors differently. You want to strengthen your brain, train your brain, start eating with your other hand, brush your teeth, comb your hair with your other hand. You're doing a tremendous deed for activating neuroplasticity in your brain. And seek out and be open to feedback. And you can rehearse situations in the future by imagining them, visualizing them beforehand. And finally, the last is the ability to get things done. And here this involves a number of different kind of abilities within yourself: focus, courage, tolerating uncertainty, being assertive, being decisive, learning from your mistakes. So the goal of a mistake is to find the lesson in that mistake and appreciate your effort. One of the key tools here is to review your history and to own your successes and your resourcefulness. Identify your skills to help you in your sense of confidence. Recognize the importance of every day. Every step counts. And finally, you set achievable goals and goals for today, and start the day by deciding what would make today a successful day for you. And let me just summarize. You want to develop a healthy, positive internal voice. You want to establish and strengthen relationships with positive, supportive people. You want to set boundaries, limit time with critical, negative people. Reaffirm your spiritual beliefs. Explore, reaffirm your purpose in giving service. There's no substitute for practicing a 10 to 15 minute relaxation daily. Recognize, address, and resolve unfinished emotional business. Train yourself to focus on positive thoughts, and I really mean train. It's a process. Every time you notice you're thinking about the negative, it's another opportunity to shift into a more positive. And take time for appreciation and gratitude. So let me just mention, first of all, I didn't touch on the questionnaires you have, but that gives you a very brief, quick picture of your strengths and weaknesses in this model of resilience. There's a sheet in your handout about an 8-week group program that I will be beginning soon. Also information about my 2 audio programs on resilience. And also, I've put in a card if you are interested. We're offering at my office a free consultation if you want to talk about some of these issues. My email address and my website, where I have a number of my articles. And thank you all very much.